like to welcome everybody. We're going to get started right now with news you can use. We've got three things. We got a little deep water to wade into here this afternoon, and we're going to talk about, to begin with, what happened yesterday, the Fed rate hike. They came out with what was expected, about 80% probability that they would do, that they did, 75% or 75 basis points increase, 0.75% increase. Now, what this did was brought the Fed rate to between 3 and 3.25%. Remember, it started the beginning of this year at 0.25, 0.25%. Essentially, it was almost zero. So we're at 3.0 to 3.25. That's the guidance they give. They do a range. They don't give you a specific number, but 3 to 3.25. Expect that number to be above 4% by the end of this year. They signaled yesterday that inflation was still not out of control. They don't use that kind of verbiage, but essentially that's what they meant. And expect another big hammer in November when they meet again, and the next rate increase we will see. We'll talk about this on a future news you can use about what we are to expect. However, expect it to be pretty big because they have not been able to get inflation under control. We're going to talk about what that means and kind of go through the numbers, what that means to the average person out there and also the average home buyer. And we got to keep everything kind of in context. But one of the most important things that we tend to overlook a lot, and the society as a whole overlooks, everybody focuses on things like the stock market, which, by the way, dropped again today for the third day in a row. Everybody has a big fit about the stock market. They may make less to do about the fact that the housing market is dropping as well. The housing market is significantly bigger and more important to more people in the US and worldwide, frankly, than is the stock market. It's just a bigger industry as a whole. For every home that sells, approximately, this is the Commerce Department's come up with these numbers, approximately $50,000 goes back into the economy. So even if a seller sold it and made nothing on the deal, about $50,000 goes into the economy through commissions, closing costs, expenses, the handyman that comes in and touches things up before, contractors, that kind of thing. And so keeping not just housing affordable, but keeping a volume of transactions is really important, because when you lose that volume of transactions, you actually have an effect on the economy as a whole. And that is what we're seeing right now. The Fed is focused and has basically two areas of things they can do to keep inflation down. One is the money supply. They did that. They started that late last year into this year. We used to call it, back in the old days, we called it printing money, or sucking money back up from the economy and from the world. They started doing that. And then the second thing they can do is what you're seeing as of yesterday. They could raise the interest rate. So they're doing both of those things to kind of keep inflation down. But keep in mind, here's just by the numbers, let's just go through this thing real quick. Interest rates yesterday, before this rate increase, were about 6.5%, 6.45%. So, 6.45%. So if somebody wanted to go out and get a new loan now, an FHA, a conforming loan that meets the FHA, they pay about 6.4, 6.5%. That number is easily going to be above 7% by the end of the year. 7% is higher than it's been for the last 30 years. There's been little periods where it went up for a short period of time, but it came right back down. So we're at an all-time high. But that's the lowest of the numbers we're going to look at. Above that, inflation is only 8.3%. So interest is 6.5 going to 7. Inflation is just a little higher than that at 8.3. Rents, when you look at that, for the last 12 months, rents have gone up 12% across the country. But even better than that, bigger than that, is general consumer price index, or consumer prices. For example, if you bought a basket full of groceries and a bunch of different things, auto parts, so on and so forth, a year ago, and you bought it again last week, you would have paid 14% more last week than you did a year ago. So CPI, Consumer Price Index, is up way more than interest rates, way more than inflation, way more than the increase in rents, which is significant at 12%. By the way, that's one of the largest one-year increases rents have ever had. But topping all of that out is the fact that 66% more would be your payment last month than it was a year ago last month for a housing payment, a mortgage payment, if you took out a loan. So, you know, we look at all these numbers, oh, interest is 6.5% and inflation is 8 and all that. Anybody who bought and got a loan last week versus a year ago is paying 66% more. That's a huge, huge, huge increase. Nobody really focuses on that. And that's one of the reasons that rents have been going up, is because people can't afford to get to buy a house. In a lot of cases, it's priced out, the monthly payments priced out of their ability to do this thing. And so they end up renting when they can't buy. And I started digging into that, and there's always this old rent versus buy thing. You know, are you better off renting, you better off buying, depending on your financial situation and how you pay taxes and things like that. It may be better to actually, at a higher income level, a really high income level, 7-figure income levels, a lot of times it's better to rent than it is to buy. You can deduct more of that rental payment than you can of your mortgage payment. So I started looking at various parts of the country where it's cheaper to rent or cheaper to buy. And here's what we came up with. If you are in the following areas, and let me give you an example. Memphis is going to be my example city in the areas where it is cheaper to buy than it is to rent. Memphis, right now, the average rent's $914 a month. The average home payment is less than half of that. It's less than $450, $440 some dollars a month. So it's much cheaper in Memphis and in Tennessee as a whole to buy than it is to rent. Also, Oklahoma, big swaths, if not all of Florida, especially Tampa and Miami, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Alabama, Missouri, Louisiana. These places, it's always, right now, it is all cheaper, always cheaper to buy a house than it is to rent a house. In some cases by 50% or more. So now contrast that with some of the other areas of the country I'm going to talk about, and it's sometimes double or triple to make a mortgage payment versus rent. So for example, in California, the average home is around $900,000 now, and the average rent's about $3,500 to $4,000. So it's much cheaper to rent to get that same home because of the high value of prices. So California is the opposite of that. Washington State, Utah, Colorado, all of these places, it's much cheaper to rent than to buy. Also, Maine, state of Maine, and New York, primarily New York City. Once again, cheaper, much, much cheaper to rent than it is to buy. So how does this affect us in our business? What do we do with this kind of information? Well, if you're going to be either a long-term landlord or you're going to be a homeowner who's going to stay in their house for a period of time, and by period, I mean more than 5 years, I'd recommend looking at some of those first states I listed: Tennessee, Oklahoma, Florida, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Alabama, Missouri, Louisiana, and I'd add Arkansas to that list as well. There just wasn't enough big cities in Arkansas to make the list, but this would be the place to put your money for a longer term, because you're going to get a 2% per month or bigger rent for your mortgage payment than you would in California, where you're going to get about a 40%, 0.4 of 1% rent factor. So you're not even going to make the minimum rates that, you know, landlords nationwide work with, which is a minimum of 1% a month. You should be 2. I like to stay at 4%. You can only do that in places like Pennsylvania and Indiana right now, some places in Illinois as well. But it's definitely better to rent in the higher priced areas. It's better to own in the lower priced areas. So I think you're going to see more people migrate. They migrated during the great pandemic here that we had during COVID. They migrated because they didn't want to live in cities. They wanted to live out in the suburbs, and it gave them a chance to get a twofer. In other words, instead of just moving out of the city to the suburbs of California from San Diego to San Diego County, they moved to New Hampshire to be close to their relatives. So we saw that whole thing go. We saw a lot of people leaving California subsequent to that for political reasons, tax reasons. Those two reasons are the primary things. But now you're seeing economic migration. You're seeing people say, you know what? I can sell my house in California, take all my cash, or Washington State or Utah or Colorado, take all my cash, and I could buy 3 or 4 times the house in Tennessee or Alabama or Louisiana or Florida as I can here, and still have some money left over in my pocket. So you're going to see economic migration over the next several years, I would predict. Now, we don't have enough time to go through kind of summing this all up. So on Tuesday, we'll kind of talk about, really long-term projections and then also some short-term things, where I would go to make money on a short-term basis, and the quickest and easiest way. We're seeing some really interesting things out there. For example, and we'll probably have Brandy talk about this on Tuesday. We're getting a ton of people who are in foreclosure, in default. These are the folks that were in the forbearance program early on during the COVID thing, and they got out of forbearance. And as we predicted 2 years ago, these guys weren't going to be able to make their payments. And now they're, the fit has hit the shan and they're staying after school for detention, i.e. they are in foreclosure and in default, and they're going to lose their house. So there's a lot of motivated sellers out there providing product to the marketplace that you guys can buy. And there's some other things that are really unique trends out there that, really are super to be in this business. I mean, I've been in this thing coming up to 24 years now, and I have never seen a market this good ever. There was even my little 6-month window in 2006 where we made $100,000 on every project we did, was not as good as what I'm seeing now. And it would behoove you to, wipe away, clean off everything else you're doing and focus on this business for at least the next year, if not the next 3, depending on what the Fed does next year with interest rates. So that's news you can use for today.